The Russian Revolution. In 1905, while Russia was engaged in the Russo-Japanese War, the communists tried to get the farmers to revolt against the Tsar, but they refused. After this aborted attempt, the Tsar deposited $400 million in the Chase Bank, National City Bank, Guaranty Trust Bank, the Hanover Trust Bank, and Manufacturers Trust Bank, and $80 million in the Rothschild Bank in Paris, because he knew who was behind the growing revolutionary movement, and hoped to end it. In 1917, the revolt began. Grand Duke Nicholas said, "It is on God himself that the Bolsheviks are waging war." Czar Nicholas II, who succeeded Alexander III, 1881–94, was dethroned in March after a series of riots, and a provincial government was set up by Prince George Lvov, a liberal progressive reformer who wanted to set up a democracy. He made an effort to strengthen the Russian army to prevent any future revolts, but ended up resigning, which allowed Kerensky, a democratic socialist, to take over and form a coalition government. He kept the war with Germany going, and issued an amnesty order for the communists who had been exiles after the aborted Red Revolution in 1905. Nearly 250,000 revolutionaries returned to Russia. The Rothschild, through Milner, planned the Russian Revolution, and along with Schiff, who gave $20 million, Sir George Buchanan, the Warburgs, the Rockefellers, the partners of J.P. Morgan, who gave at least $1 million, Olof Ashberg, of the Nye Bank of Stockholm, Sweden, the Rhine-Westphalian Syndicate, a financier named Jovotovsky, whose daughter later married Leon Trotsky, William Boyce Thompson, a director of Chase National Bank, who contributed $1 million, and Albert H. Wiggin, president of Chase National Bank, helped finance it. The Rockefellers had given their financial support after the Tsar refused to give them access to the Russian oil fields, which was already being pumped by the Royal Dutch Company, owned by the Rothschild and the Nobel brothers, who was giving Standard Oil plenty of competition on the international market. Even though John D. Rockefeller possessed $15 million in bonds from the Royal Dutch Company and Shell, rather than purchase stock to get his foot in the door and indirectly profit, he helped to finance the revolution so that he would be able to get Standard Oil firmly established in the country of Russia. As the Congress of Vienna had shown, the Illuminati had never been able to control the affairs of Russia, so they had to get rid of the Tsar, so he couldn't interfere with their plans. Leon Trotsky, whose real name was Lev Davidovich Bronstein, 1879–1940, the son of wealthy Jewish parents, who was exiled from Russia because of his part in the aborted revolution in 1905, was a reporter for Novy Mir, a communist paper in New York, from 1916–17. He had an expensive apartment and traveled around town in a chauffeur-driven limousine. He sometimes stayed at the Krupp mansion, and had been seen going in and out of Schiff's New York mansion. Trotsky was given $20 million in Jacob Schiff gold to help finance the revolution, which was deposited in a Warburg bank, then transferred to the Nya Banken in Stockholm, Sweden. According to the Knickerbocker column in the New York Journal American on February 3, 1949, today it is estimated by Jacob's grandson, John Schiff, that the old man sank about $20 million for the final triumph of Bolshevism in Russia. Trotsky left New York aboard the SS Christiania Fjord, S. Christiania, which had been chartered by Schiff and Warburg, on March 27, 1917, with communist revolutionaries. At Halifax, Nova Scotia, on April 3, the first port they docked at, the Canadians, under orders from the British Admiralty, seized Trotsky and his men, taking them to the prison at Amherst, and impounded his gold. Official records, later declassified by the Canadian government, indicate that they knew Trotsky and his small army were socialists leaving for the purposes of starting revolution against present Russian government. The Canadians were concerned that if Lenin would take over Russia, he would sign a peace treaty and stop the fighting between Russia and Germany, so that the German army could be diverted to possibly mount an offensive against the United States and Canada. The British government, through intelligence officer Sir William Wiseman, who later became a partner with Kuhn, Loeb, and Co., and American government, through Colonel House, urged them to let Trotsky go. Wilson said that if they didn't comply, the U.S. wouldn't enter the war. Trotsky was released, given an American passport, a British transport visa, and a Russian entry permit. It is obvious that Wilson knew what was going on, because accompanying Trotsky was Charles Crane of the Westinghouse Company, who was the chairman of the Democratic Finance Committee. The U.S. entered the war on April 6. Trotsky arrived in Petrograd on May 17. Meanwhile, Lenin had been able to infiltrate the Democratic Socialist Republic established by Kerensky. In October 1917, when the revolution started, Lenin, who was in Switzerland, also exiled because of the 1905 Bolshevik Revolution, negotiated with the German High Command, with the help of Max Warburg, head of the Rothschild-affiliated Warburg Bank in Frankfurt, to allow him, his wife, and 32 other Bolsheviks, to travel across Germany, to Sweden, where he was to pick up the money being held for him in the Swedish bank, then go on to Petrograd. He promised to make peace with Germany if he was able to overthrow the new Russian government. He was put in a sealed railway car, with over $5 million in gold from the German government, and upon reaching Petrograd, was joined by Stalin and Trotsky. He told the people that he could no longer work within the government to effect change, that they had to strike immediately, in force, to end the war, and end the hunger conditions of the peasants. His war cry was, "All power to the Soviets." He led the revolution, and after seizing the reins of power from Kerensky on November 7, 1917, replaced the Democratic Republic with a communist Soviet state. He kept his word and made peace with Germany in February 1918, and was able to get out of World War I. While most members of the provisional government were killed, Kerensky was allowed to live, possibly because of the general amnesty he extended to the communists exiled in 1905. Kerensky later admitted to receiving private support from American industry, which led some historians to believe that the Kerensky government was a temporary front for the Bolsheviks. Elections were held on November 25, 1917, with close to 42 million votes being cast, and the Bolshevik communists only received 24% of the vote. On July 18, 1918, the People's Congress convened, having a majority of anti-Bolsheviks, which indicated that communism wasn't the mass movement that Lenin was claiming. The next day he used an armed force to disband the body. In a speech to the House of Commons on November 5, 1919, Winston Churchill said, "Lenin was sent into Russia, in the same way that you might send a vial containing a culture of typhoid or of cholera to be poured into the water supply of a great city, and it worked with amazing accuracy." No sooner did Lenin arrive than he began beckoning a finger here and a finger there to obscure persons in sheltered retreats in New York, Glasgow, in Bern, and other countries, and he gathered together the leading spirits of a formidable sect, the most formidable sect in the world. With these spirits around him he set to work with demoniacal ability to tear to pieces every institution on which the Russian state depended. In a February 8, 1920 article for the Illustrated Sunday Herald, Churchill wrote, "From the days of Spartacus Weishaupt to those of Karl Marx, to those of Trotsky, Bela Kuhn, Rosa Luxemburg, and Emma Goldman, this worldwide conspiracy has been steadily growing. This conspiracy played a definitely recognizable role in the tragedy of the French Revolution. It has been the mainspring of every subversive movement during the 19th century, and now at last this band of extraordinary personalities from the underworld of the great cities of Europe and America have gripped the Russian people by the hair of their heads, and have become practically the undisputed masters of that enormous empire. There is no need to exaggerate the part played in the creation of Bolshevism and in the bringing about of the Russian Revolution by these international and for the most part atheistical Jews. It is certainly a very great one. It probably outweighs all others. With the notable exception of Lenin, the majority of the leading figures are Jews. Russian General Arsène de Goulavitch wrote in Tsarism and the Revolution that the main purveyors of funds for the revolution, however, were neither crackpot Russian millionaires nor armed bandits on Lenin. The real money primarily came from certain British and American circles which for a long time past had lent their support to the Russian revolutionary cause. De Goulavitch, who received the information from another Russian general, said that the revolution was engineered by the English, more precisely by Sir George Buchanan and Lord Alfred Milner, of the Round Table. In private conversations I have been told that over 21 million rubles were spent by Lord Milner in financing the Russian Revolution. Frank Vanderlip, president of the Rockefeller-controlled First National Bank, compared Lenin to George Washington. The Rockefellers' public relations man, Ivy Lee, was used to inform Americans that the communists were misunderstood idealists who were actually kind benefactors of mankind. Lenin even knew that he wasn't really in control, and wrote, "The state does not function as we desired. How does it function? The car does not obey. A man is at the wheel and seems to lead it, but the car does not drive in the desired direction. It moves as another force wishes." In March 1918, on orders from Schiff, which were relayed by Colonel House, the Bolshevik Second Congress adopted the name Communist Party. That same year, Lenin organized the Red Army, Red Shield Rothschild, to control the population, and a secret police to keep track of the communists. The Third International, or Comintern, had its first Congress in 1919 in Moscow, where they established that Russia would control all of the world's communist movements. They met again in 1920 to lay the foundation for the new Communist Party. Hopes of world revolution ran high, as they hoped to liberate the working class and enable them to break away from the reformist democracy they sprung from. Lenin said that the victory of the world communist revolution is assured. But, he added, that the revolutionary activities had to be discontinued so they could develop trade relations with capitalist countries, to strengthen their own. The name of the country was officially changed to the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, USSR. Their aims were to create a single worldwide communist party and to overthrow the international bourgeoisie by force to create an international Soviet republic. From 1916-21, famine swept through Russia, perhaps due to crop tampering, with close to 5 million dying, because industry was shut down. On September 21, 1921, American relief services began in Russia, after President Herbert Hoover received a plea from famous Russian writer Maxim Gorky. The United States appropriated $20 million for the country, with $8 million spent for medical supplies. Over 700,000 tons of goods were sent to feed 18 million people. As it turned out, the U.S. was actually supporting the Communist Civil War, which ended in 1922. American and European industrialists rushed to the aid of the Russians. The International Barnsdale Corporation and Standard Oil got drilling rights. Stewart, James and Cook Incorporated reorganized the coal mines. General Electric sold them electrical equipment, and other major firms like Westinghouse, DuPont and RCA also aided the communists. Standard Oil of New Jersey bought 50% of their huge Caucasus oil fields, and in 1927, built a large refinery in Russia. Standard Oil, with their subsidiary, Vacuum Oil Company, made a deal to sell Soviet oil to European countries, and even arranged to get them a $75 million loan. Today, Russia is the world's largest petroleum producer, and some researchers believe that the Rockefellers still own the oil production facilities in Russia, withdrawing the profits through Switzerland. Rockefeller's Chase National Bank, later known as Chase Manhattan Bank, helped establish the American-Russian Chamber of Commerce in 1922, and its first president was Reeve Schley, a Chase vice president. In 1925, Chase National and Prom Bank, a German bank, developed a complete program to finance the Soviets' raw material exports to the United States, and imports of U.S. cotton and machinery. Chase National and Equitable Trust Company were the dominant forces in Soviet credit dealings. In 1928, Chase sold the Bolsheviks bonds in America, and was severely criticized by various patriotic groups who called them a disgrace to America. America sent Russia vast quantities of food and other relief supplies. Lenin had said that the capitalists would do business with anyone, and when Russia was through with them, the communists would take over the world. That is what the Russian communists have been led to believe. In reality, the Illuminati was completely financing the entire country of Russia, in order to transform them into a world power with principles completely opposite to that of the United States. In May, 1922, Lenin suffered the first of a series of strokes. When he died in 1924, supposedly from syphilis, the country's leadership was taken over by Joseph Stalin, 1879-1953, Iosif Vissarionovich Jugashvili, after a bitter fight with Trotsky. Lenin said on his deathbed, "I committed a great error. My nightmare is to have the feeling that I'm lost in an ocean of blood from the innumerable victims. It is too late to return. To save our country, Russia, we would have needed men like Francis of Assisi. With 10 men like him we would have saved Russia." Trotsky was expelled from the party in 1927, and then exiled from the country in 1929. He attempted to mobilize other communist groups against Stalin. In 1924, Stalin wrote the foundations of Leninism, hoping that Lenin would pass the torch of leadership to him. However, in a December 1922 letter to the party Congress, Lenin said of Stalin, after taking over the position of Secretary General, "Comrade Stalin accumulated in his hands immeasurable power, and I am not certain whether he will be always able to use this power with the required care." Lenin wrote in January 1923, "Stalin is excessively rude, and this defect, which can be freely tolerated in our midst and in contacts among U.S. communists, becomes a defect which cannot be tolerated in one holding the position of Secretary General. Because of this, I propose that the comrades consider the method by which Stalin would be removed from this position and by which another man would be selected for it, a man, who above all, would differ from Stalin, in only one quality, namely, greater tolerance, greater loyalty, greater kindness, and more considerate attitude toward the comrades, a less capricious temper, etc." Financed by Kuhn, Loeb, and Co., Stalin implemented a new economic policy for rapid industrialization, known as the First Five-Year Plan. Even though the U.S. government was sending over food, Stalin was using the food as a weapon to finish communizing the country. Those who refused to cooperate with the communist government were starved to death. Between 1932-33, it is estimated that between 3 and 7 million people died as a result of Stalin's tactics. Stalin later admitted that 2/3 of Russia's industrial capability was due to the assistance of the United States. Just as Lenin said, "Down with religion. Long live atheism." Stalin said, "God must be out of Russia in 5 years." He eventually did away with the withering away concept, and developed a fanatical, rigid, and powerful police state. Stalin said that the goals of communism was to create chaos throughout the world, institute a single world economic system, prod the advanced countries to consistently give aid to underdeveloped countries, and to divide the world into regional groups, which would be a transitional stage to a one-world government. The communists have not deviated from this blueprint. In 1933, the Illuminati urged FDR to recognize the country of Russia in order to save them from financial ruin, as a number of European countries had already done. On November 17, 1933, the U.S. granted diplomatic recognition to Russia. In return, Russia promised not to interfere in our internal affairs, a promise they never kept. They became a member of the League of Nations in 1934, but were thrown out in 1939 because of their aggressive actions toward Finland. Meanwhile, the U.S. continued to send them aid. The Cleveland firm of Arthur G. McKee provided equipment for a huge steel plant at Magnitogorsky. John Clatter of Detroit equipped and installed a tractor plant at Kilyabinsky. Henry Ford and the Austin Company provided equipment for an automobile production center at Gorky, and Colonel Hugh Cooper, creator of the Muscle Shoals Dam, planned and built the giant hydroelectric plant at Dnipropetrovsk. On August 23, 1939, Hitler signed a non-aggression pact with Stalin, and together they attacked Poland in a blitzkrieg war, which led to World War II. Because of a treaty with Poland, France and England were forced to declare war on Germany. Hitler had said publicly that he didn't want war with England, but now was forced into battle with them. By the end of May, the Netherlands and Belgium had fallen, and France followed in June. In 1940, Russia moved against Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, Bessarabia, now Moldova, northern Bukovina, Ny Romania, and part of Poland. This sort of worried Hitler. In England, the Illuminati-controlled press attacked Prime Minister Chamberlain, because they felt their war against Germany was too mild. The international bankers wanted a major war. Chamberlain was pressured into resigning, and Winston Churchill replaced him, and immediately stepped up the war with an air attack on Germany. A year later, the German High Command, unknown by Hitler, sent Rudolf Hess to England to meet with Lord Hamilton and Churchill to negotiate a peace treaty. Hess, next to Hitler, was Germany's highest-ranking officer, credited for writing down and editing Hitler's dictation for Mein Kampf and also contributing to its content. The German generals offered to eliminate Hitler, so they could join forces to attack Communist Russia. Churchill refused, and had Hess jailed. He was later tried and convicted at the Nuremberg war crime trials, and was given a life sentence, which was served out at the Spandau prison in Spain. Shortly after their failure, the German High Command convinced Hitler to attack Russia, which he did. After overrunning Europe, 121 German divisions, 19 armored divisions, and 3 air fleets invaded Russia on June 22, 1941. American communists urged the world to mount an immediate united effort to help Russia. The Nazi advance was swift and savage, with the German army barreling deep into the Ukraine with one victory after another. Foreign policy experts predicted the defeat and collapse of the country. In October, Kiev fell, and Hitler announced there would be a final effort to take Moscow and end the war. On October 24, with his army 37 miles from Moscow, Hitler planned on waiting until the winter was over before he made his final attack. But then, Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, and the U.S. entered the war. Through a Lend-Lease agreement, America responded by sending $11 billion in raw materials, machinery, tools, complete industrial plants, spare parts, textiles, clothing, canned meat, sugar, flour, weapons, tanks, trucks, aircraft, and gasoline to aid the Russians, which turned the tide against the Germans. Some of the material which was sent: 6,430 aircraft, 121 merchant ships, 1,285 locomotives, 3,734 tanks, 206,000 trucks, buses, tractors, and cars, 82 torpedo boats and small destroyers, 2 billion tons of steel, 22,400,000 rounds of ammunition, 87,900 tons of explosives, 245,000 telephones, 5,500,000 pairs of boots, 2,500,000 automobile inner tubes, and 2 million tons of food. In dollars, it broke down this way. 1942, $1,422,853,332. 1943, $2,955,811,271. 1944, $3,459,274,155. 1945, $1,838,281,501. The Russians were to pay for all supplies, and return all usable equipment after the war. It didn't happen. For instance, they kept 84 cargo ships, some of which were used to supply North Vietnam with equipment during the Vietnam War. What we sent to the Russians, after the war, became the foundation upon which the Soviet industrial machine was built. Through an agreement negotiated years later by Henry Kissinger, the Russians agreed to pay back $722 million of the $11 billion, which amounted to about 7 cents on the dollar. In 1975, after paying back $32 million, they announced they were not going to pay the remainder of the Lend-Lease debt. After the war, in 1946, America turned over two-thirds of Germany's aircraft manufacturing capabilities to Russia, who dismantled the installations and rebuilt them in their country, forming the initial stage of their jet aircraft industry. Even though Congress had passed legislation forbidding shipments of non-war materials, various pro-Soviet officials and communist traders in key positions openly defied the law and made shipments. In 1944, Harry Hopkins, Henry Morgenthau, Secretary of the Treasury, Averell Harriman, U.S. Ambassador to Russia, and Harry Dexter White, Assistant Secretary of Treasury, supplied the material needed for Russia to print occupation currency. Printing plates, colored inks, varnish, tint blocks, and paper were sent from Great Falls, Montana, in 2 shipments of 5 C-47s each, which had been loaded at the National Airport near Washington, D.C. The Russians then set up a printing facility in a Nazi printing plant in Leipzig and began to print currency which the U.S. couldn't account for. Russia refused to redeem the currency with rubles, therefore the U.S. Treasury had to back the currency. The Russians were using these newly printed marks to sap the German economy and take advantage of the United States, who, by the end of 1946, had lost $250 million because of redeeming, in U.S. dollars, marks which were issued in excess of the total amount of marks issued by the Finance Office, who was officially printing occupation money for the Germans. In addition, the $18,102 charge for the plates and printing material was never paid. In 1943, a congressional investigation revealed that even before the U.S. had built its first atomic bomb, half of all the uranium and technical information needed to construct such a bomb was secretly sent to Russia. This included chemicals, metals, and minerals instrumental in creating an atomic bomb and manufacturing a hydrogen bomb. In 1980, James Roosevelt, the son of President Franklin Roosevelt, wrote a novel, A Family Matter, which detailed how his father made a bold secret decision to share the results of the Manhattan Project with the Soviet Union. In 1943 and 1944, Air Force Major Racy Jordan was a land-lease expediter and liaison officer for the Russians in Great Falls, which was the primary staging area for the massive land-lease supply operation to the Soviet Union. In his diaries, which were published in 1952, he said that the U.S. built the Soviet war machine by shipping all the materials needed to construct an atomic pile, including graphite, cadmium metal, thorium, and uranium. In March 1943, a number of black leather suitcases wrapped in white window sash cord and sealed with red wax, said to be of a diplomatic nature, were to be sent to Moscow. One night the Russians had taken them out for dinner, and suspicious of their friendliness, Jordan decided to sneak away, and went back to the base with an armed sentry. He discovered that 2 Russian couriers from Washington had arrived and had procured a plane bound for Russia, to take about 50 of these cases. He detained the flight, and discovered that the shipment was being sent to the Director, Institute of Technical and Economic Information in Moscow. He opened 18 of the cases, and discovered a collection of maps that identified the names and locations of all the industrial plants in the U.S., along with classified military sites. One case contained a folder of military documents marked, from Hiss, and another case which contained a White House memo from H. Harry Hopkins, former Secretary of Commerce and head of the Lend-Lease program, to Al Mikian, Russia's number 3 man, after Stalin and Foreign Commissar Molotov, which accompanied a map of Oak Ridge and the Manhattan Engineering District, and a report from Oak Ridge, which contained phrases like, energy produced by fission, and walls 5 feet thick, of lead and water, to control flying neutrons. And quad. In short, traders within the administration of Roosevelt were giving the Soviets the instructions and the material to build nuclear weapons, even before the United States had fully developed the technology for use by our country. Jordan reported all of this to Air Force intelligence, but nothing ever happened. The Russians' ability to establish their space program was also provided by America. When General Patton was moving eastward through Germany, he captured the towns of Peenemünde and Nordhausen, where German scientists had developed the V-1 and V-2 rockets. General Dwight Eisenhower ordered him to turn the 2 towns over to the Russians, who dismantled the facilities and shipped them to Russia, along with the scientists. One of the German scientists, Dr. Werner von Braun, led a group of 100 other scientists, who surrendered to the Americans. He later became head of the American space program. Braun was prepared to launch history's first satellite, long before Russia developed one, but Eisenhower would not authorize it, because it was to be made to appear that Russian technology was superior to ours, when it wasn't. It would add to the facade being developed that Russia was stronger than we were, and therefore should be feared. As recently as 1978, it was believed that Russia still had not been able to construct a single-stage rocket capable of placing large payloads in orbit. American researcher, Lloyd Malin, called the Soviets' Lunik moon landing a hoax, since no tracking station picked up its signals, and that Alexei Leonev's spacewalk on March 18, 1965 was also staged. Concerning the film of the spacewalk, Malin said, 4 months of solid research interviewing experts in the fields of photo-optics, photochemistry and electro-optics, all of whom carefully studied the motion picture film and still photographs officially released by the Soviet government, indicate them to be double-printed. The foreground, Leonov, was superimposed on the background, Earth below. The Russian film showed reflections from the glass plate under which a double plate is made. Leonov was suspended from wire or cables. In several episodes of the Russian film, light was reflected from a small portion of wire, or cable, attached to Leonov's spacesuit. One camera angle was impossible of achievement. This showed Leonov crawling out of his hatch into space. It was a head-on shot, so the camera would have had to have been located out in space beyond the spaceship. The U.S. donated 2 food production factories, $6,924,000, a petroleum refinery, $29,050,000, a repair plant for precision instruments, $550,000, 17 steam and 3 hydroelectric plants, $273,289,000. Later, Dressler Industries built a $146 million plant at Kibishov to produce high-quality drill bits for oil exploration. The C.E. Lummus Company of New Jersey built a $105 million petrochemical plant in the Ukraine. $45 million would be put up by Lummus through financing from Exim Bank and other private banks, which was guaranteed by the OPIC. Alice Chalmers built a $35 million iron or pelletizing plant in Russia, which is one of the world's 4 largest. The Aluminum Company of America, Alcoa, built an aluminum plant, which consumed half the world's supply of bauxite. We sent the Russians computer systems, oil drilling equipment, pipes, and other supplies. The ball bearings used by Russia to improve the guidance systems on their rockets and missiles, such as their SS-18 intercontinental ballistic missiles, were purchased in 1972 from the Bryant Grinder Company in Springfield, Vermont. All of this financial aid to Russia was advocated by Henry Kissinger and the U.S. government. The reasoning behind it was to allow Russia to increase their industrial and agricultural output to match ours, because by bringing the 2 countries closer together, hostilities would be eased. They were not. The Illuminati, through the U.S. government, had allowed the Soviet Union to have a technology equal to our own. Congressman Otto Passman, who was the chairman of the Appropriations Subcommittee, said, "The United States cannot survive as a strong nation if we continue to dissipate our resources and give away our wealth to the world."